Sometimes the most powerful answers come from the most unexpected places. When 17-year-old Marcus Williams stepped up to the Family Feud podium that Tuesday afternoon, nobody in the studio knew they were about to witness something that would change television forever. Not even Steve Harvey, who had been hosting game shows for over 2 decades, was prepared for what this quiet teenager was about to reveal. The cameras were rolling, the audience was energetic, and everything seemed perfectly normal. But sometimes normal is just the calm before a storm of humanity that no script could ever capture. Marcus stood at the end of the Williams family podium, but the irony of the name wasn't lost on anyone who knew his real story. He wasn't actually related to the family he was representing. The studio lights were blazing as Steve Harvey worked his magic with the Rodriguez family from San Antonio. The energy was infectious, the laughter genuine, and the competition fierce. Marcus watched from his position, his hands clasped behind his back, wearing the only dress shirt he owned. It was slightly too small, bought from a thrift store with money he'd earned from odd jobs, but he wore it with quiet dignity. Steve had noticed Marcus during the family introductions. There was something about the way the teenager carried himself that caught the host's attention. While the other family members were animated and excited, Marcus stood with a stillness that seemed older than his years. When Steve asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, Marcus had answered simply, successful. Not rich, not famous, successful. The game progressed through its normal rhythm. The Williams family was trailing slightly, but the energy remained high. Steve cracked his usual jokes, the audience responded with laughter, and everything flowed exactly as it should. But during the fourth round, when the category came up on the board, something shifted in the studio's energy. Name something people consider a luxury, Steve announced, reading from his card with his characteristic enthusiasm. The survey had been taken from 100 people, and Steve expected the usual answers: cars, jewelry, expensive vacations, designer clothes. Standard Family Feud fare. Marcus stepped up to the podium for his turn. He was calm, focused, but there was something in his posture that made Steve look at him more carefully. The teenager placed his hands on the podium, took a breath, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. A bed that's only mine. The studio fell silent. Steve's eyebrows shot up. He set down his cards and stared at Marcus, trying to process what he'd just heard. The audience wasn't sure how to react. This wasn't a typical Family Feud answer. This was something else entirely. A bed that's only mine, Steve repeated slowly, his voice missing its usual theatrical energy. Marcus, that's your answer? Marcus nodded, his chin lifting slightly. There was no shame in his voice, no embarrassment, just truth, stated simply and with dignity. Survey says, Steve called out, but his heart wasn't in the theatrical buildup. Everyone in the studio was holding their breath. The board revealed that a bed was indeed the number 3 answer. The Williams family erupted in celebration, but Marcus remained still at the podium. He wasn't celebrating, he was watching Steve, and Steve was watching him back. Something passed between them in that moment. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on reading people, on understanding the stories behind the smiles, recognized something in Marcus's eyes that made his chest tighten. Marcus, Steve said, stepping closer to the podium, abandoning his usual position center stage. Can I ask you something? The studio quieted again. This wasn't part of the normal game flow, and everyone sensed it. How long has it been since you had a bed that was only yours? Marcus didn't hesitate. 3 years. 2 words that hit the studio like a physical blow. Steve felt his professional demeanor crack slightly. The audience began to understand that they were witnessing something far more significant than a game show moment. 3 years, Steve repeated, his voice softer now. Where have you been sleeping, son? Marcus looked out at the audience, then back at Steve. For a moment, it seemed like he might deflect, might give a safer answer. Instead, he chose truth. Shelters mostly. Couches when people would let me. The church basement for the last 4 months, until the Williams family found me. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial. This wasn't the kind of content they typically aired. But something about the dignity in Marcus's voice, the way he spoke without self-pity, made them keep the cameras rolling. Steve sat his cards down on the podium and walked around to Marcus's side. The teenager was taller than Steve had realized, but there was still something vulnerable about him. Something that made Steve's paternal instincts kick in. "What happened 3 years ago?" Steve asked gently. Marcus took a breath. "My mom died. Cancer. We didn't have insurance, so we lost our apartment paying for treatments that didn't work. I was 14, and the state was going to put me in the system, but I'd heard stories. I thought I could make it on my own." The silence in the studio was deafening. Camera operators found themselves wiping their eyes. Audience members sat frozen, many with hands over their hearts. "And you've been making it on your own for 3 years?" Steve asked. "Yes, sir. I finished high school. I have a job at a warehouse on weekends. I'm applying for college scholarships." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he spoke about his accomplishments. "I'm not asking for pity, Mr. Harvey. I'm just saying that when you asked about luxury, that's what came to mind. A space that's mine, where I don't have to worry about someone asking me to leave." Steve Harvey, who had faced every possible situation a game show could throw at him, found himself in completely uncharted territory. This wasn't just a contestant sharing a sad story. This was a young man who had survived the unthinkable and was standing on national television with his head held high, turning his pain into purpose. "Marcus," Steve said, his voice thick with emotion, "you said you want to be successful. What does that look like to you?" "I want to help kids who are going through what I went through. I want to study social work, maybe law. I want to make sure other kids don't have to choose between the streets and the system." The audience began to respond then, not with applause, but with those small sounds people make when they're deeply moved. Steve looked out at the crowd, then back at Marcus, and made a decision that would define this moment forever. He began to remove his watch. It was a beautiful piece, expensive and elegant, the kind of watch that represented success and stability. Steve had worn it to every taping for the past 5 years. "Marcus," Steve said, holding the watch in his palm, "you said you want to be successful. But son, you already are. You've survived things that would break most adults. You've kept your dignity, your dreams, and your desire to help others. That's not just success, that's heroism." He reached for Marcus's wrist and carefully clasped the watch around it. The band was too big for the teenager's thin wrist, but somehow it looked exactly right. "This watch has been with me for every show, every success, every moment I've felt proud of what I've accomplished. But you know what? What you've accomplished at 17 years old makes everything I've done look easy." Marcus stared down at the watch, his composure finally cracking. Tears began to stream down his face, but he wasn't sobbing. These were tears of recognition, of being seen, of having his struggle acknowledged, not as something to pity, but as something to honor. "And you know what else?" Steve continued, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket. "This has my personal number on it, not my manager's, not my assistant's, mine, because I want to know how the scholarship applications go. I want to know when you get into college. I want to know when you graduate, because your story isn't ending here, Marcus. It's just beginning." The audience erupted then, but not in typical game show applause. This was something deeper, something that recognized they had witnessed a moment of pure human connection. People were on their feet, some crying openly, others with their hands over their hearts. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio. Ladies and gentlemen, this young man just taught us something important. We talk about luxury, like it's cars and jewelry and vacations, but real luxury is safety. It's knowing you have a place to rest your head. It's having people who believe in you. It's being able to dream about tomorrow, because you're not worried about surviving today. He looked back at Marcus, who was still staring at the watch through his tears. Marcus, you talked about a bed that's only yours. Well, I want to make sure you never have to worry about that again. Steve reached into his other pocket and pulled out his phone. Right there, on live television, he made a call. Angela, it's Steve. I need you to connect me with our scholarship foundation. We've got a young man here who needs our help. Yes, right now. Yes, I'm serious. The camera caught every moment as Steve arranged for Marcus to receive a full scholarship to any state university he could get into. The Williams family, who had been watching in stunned silence, finally broke down crying. Miss Catherine Williams rushed from her position at the family podium to wrap Marcus in a hug. "We told you that you were family," she whispered loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "But now the whole world knows it too." Steve looked at the Rodriguez family, still standing at their podium, and asked, "You folks mind if we call this game a tie? I think we've got something more important happening here than points on a board." Carlos Rodriguez, the father of the competing family, immediately stepped forward. "Steve, this young man deserves this win more than we do. Our kids have beds to go home to tonight." What happened next was pure magic. Both families came together at center stage, forming a circle around Marcus. Steve joined them, and for a moment that lasted several minutes, the Family Feud set became something sacred. A place where a homeless teenager's dignity was recognized, where his dreams were validated, where his struggle was transformed into inspiration. The episode aired 6 weeks later and became the most watched Family Feud episode in the show's history. But more importantly, it sparked a national conversation about youth homelessness, about the kids who age out of the system with nowhere to go, about the quiet courage it takes to survive when the world seems to have forgotten you. Marcus received over 500 scholarship offers from universities across the country. He chose to attend the University of California, Berkeley, where he studied social work and law. During his freshman year, he started a nonprofit organization called Beds for Dreams, which provides temporary housing and support for homeless teenagers. The watch Steve gave him became more than a timepiece. It became a symbol of belief, of recognition, of the moment when someone saw past his circumstances to his character. Marcus wore it to his high school graduation, to his college graduation, and later to his law school graduation. Steve Harvey kept his promise. He checked in on Marcus regularly, celebrating every milestone, offering encouragement during difficult times, and always reminding him that his worth wasn't determined by his circumstances, but by his character and his dreams. 5 years later, when Marcus graduated from law school, the first person he called wasn't his adopted family or his friends. It was Steve. "Mr. Harvey, I did it. I'm officially a lawyer." "I never doubted it for a second," Steve replied. "Your mama would be so proud. And Marcus, that watch you're wearing, it's keeping perfect time." The scholarship fund that Steve established that day has since helped over 200 homeless teenagers attend college. They call it the Marcus Williams Scholarship, but Marcus insisted on a different name, the Bed and Dreams Fund, because he believes every young person deserves both safety and hope. Marcus still keeps the business card Steve gave him, framed in his office, where he practices law, specializing in family services and youth advocacy. And every year, on the anniversary of that Family Feud episode, he sends Steve the same text message: "Still dreaming, still fighting, still grateful." The watch is keeping perfect time. The episode taught millions of viewers that luxury isn't about what you own, it's about what you can count on. Safety, dignity, someone who believes in you, and the freedom to dream about tomorrow because you know you'll have a place to sleep tonight. Steve Harvey learned something that day too. In an interview years later, he said, "Marcus taught me that success isn't about where you come from, it's about where you're going." And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone isn't to give them money or fame. It's to give them your time, your belief, and your respect. The watch Steve gave Marcus that day was worth about, but what Marcus gave Steve in return was priceless. A reminder that dignity isn't dependent on circumstances, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important victories happen when we recognize the heroes who are already among us. Today, Marcus Williams is a successful attorney, a homeowner, and an advocate for homeless youth. He has a bed that's only his, but more importantly, he has a platform to make sure other kids don't have to sleep without one. He still wears Steve's watch, and it's still keeping perfect time, counting down the moments until no young person has to consider a safe place to sleep a luxury. Because that's what happens when dignity meets opportunity, when recognition meets character, and when a simple question about luxury reveals the most important truth of all, that everyone deserves a place to call home, and everyone deserves to have their dreams taken seriously, regardless of where they lay their head at night. The Williams family had taken him in just 3 months earlier, and when they were selected for Family Feud, they insisted Marcus come with them. "He's family now," Mrs. Catherine Williams had told the producers during their background check. What she didn't tell them was the full story of how Marcus had ended up sleeping in their church basement.